If you believe the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs data analysis, over 40% of our skills every 5 years will need to be relearned or reskilled, partly because of AI. That is a shockingly high number. That means that you're going to have to effectively reinvent yourself many times over the course of your career. So the job to really have is one which encourages you to always be curious and be willing to learn new things. In the world of 20 jobs and 7 careers where you've got to really invest in your own personal development, that's important.
That's Asheesh Advani. He's the CEO of Junior Achievement Worldwide, which is a Nobel Prize nominated nonprofit that's dedicated to preparing youth for employment and entrepreneurship. Together with Marshall Goldsmith, he authored the book Modern Achievement, a new approach to timeless lessons for aspiring leaders. And we're about to hear about said approach. So you'll learn 1, why our idea of achievement needs a rework. 2, why to befriend both older and younger people. And 3, an underutilized tactic for dramatically accelerating your career learning. I'm Pete Mikaitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Asheesh. Asheesh, welcome.
It's great to be on the show.
Well, I'm so excited to hear about your wisdom. Can you kick us off by sharing a particularly surprising or fascinating or counterintuitive bit you discovered while putting together your book, Modern Achievement?
So I've been at this, trying to make this a high quality, very readable book for several months now. And I really thought I was writing it for a younger audience, aspiring leaders, people in their 20s and early 30s who are at the beginning of their career. What I've learned now that people have started to read the book is when you write a book for a certain audience and another audience reads it, they actually find it less threatening or direct. So like lessons that you read written for somebody else, you're actually more likely to take them in. So that was very counterintuitive. People who are like 50 and 60 and people who are even high school kids are coming up to me and said, oh my God, I love this lesson, even though it's written for somebody who's from a different age group. And that's very counterintuitive.
Well, that is fascinating. And you know what? I've lived that with I've got young kids, 6, 5, and 1. And when we're watching a show like, I don't know, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood or Bluey or something, it's like, this lesson isn't for me, it's for the kids. And yet that's really pretty good. It happens over and over again.
Yeah. And, I'll tell you, I've got twin boys who just graduated high school and just started university. And one of my motivations for writing this book, which is all about life lessons for aspiring leaders, is they don't listen to me at all. My kids just do not listen to me. So I figured this is a way for me to convey all the things I want them to know, and they can read it at a time that makes sense for them, not makes sense for me. And you are a parent too, so I think you know what I'm talking about.
Okay, so tell us, what's sort of the big idea or core thesis in your book, Modern Achievement?
Well, most achievement books historically have been just written for a different age and a different time. A young person graduating from high school or university today is on average going to have 20 different jobs at least, and potentially as many as 7 different careers over the course of their working lives. That amount of change means the idea of achievement is also different. So most achievement books are written where you set a long-term goal, you write it down, you visualize it, and the universe helps it happen because you've been clear about it. But if you're going to have that many jobs and that many different careers, the idea of achievement has to be not just about long-term goal attainment, but also about the process and the journey to achievement.
All right. Well, could you give us an example of someone who's perhaps made the switch or picked up this philosophy that's more modern to their enrichment?
Well, I think most young people are already starting to think this way. One of the lessons in the book, for example, one of my favorites actually, is make friends who are 5 to 10 years older than you. And most young people tend to hang out with their peers who are their same age. So you've got to be somewhat intentional. If many of your career transitions are going to involve sort of networking, you have to be much more intentional about building these networks of people who will be one step ahead of you in your career, who can either promote you or help you, advise you, be mentors and role models. And that's just an example of something which at least I've seen there are young people already doing, and we share some of the stories because, junior achievement, I don't know if you know too much about JA, but.
Oh, I volunteered back in the day at Bain.
Oh, excellent.
And I just gave someone like the World of Work or World at Work chart to help them think through career stuff. So I'm a fan. I'm on board.
Oh my God, you're a fan. I love it. I didn't know that when we agreed to do this. That's awesome. So Junior Achievement been around for over 100 years now. It's an amazing organization. I've been in my role as CEO of J Worldwide now for about 9 years. And I've seen us become more global, really spread this way of thinking, being optimistic and being intentional about your career development to parts of the world where, young people are hungry for this, really hungry for this knowledge.
Okay, understood. And at that point about high achieving folks hanging out with folks who are older than them is really, I was just chatting yesterday with my buddy Justin, who's fantastic. He is in our men's group, and he is the youngest, and all of us are 5 to 10, maybe a little more years older than him. And yet it is totally working for him because sure enough, he is finding himself in career situations where he is widely recognized as a high performer. He's doing great. And part of that is he is just internalizing the wisdom and pro tips of people working in their jobs who have been working there longer. And they just share all the little tidbits they've learned and how they think about things. And he's just getting those quicker and faster than others who are only hanging out with people their age.
Well, when I wrote that lesson in the book, and I should mention the book is co-authored with Marshall Goldsmith, so we really collaborated on this. And Marshall's a celebrated leadership thinker and knows much more than me. He came back and said, Asheesh, it's not just about young people having these role models and friends that they can learn from, but it's also people older looking sort of back and saying, are there people 5 to 10 years younger than me who can help me with my next phase? Because people are just living longer and having longer working lives. So we adapted the life lesson to actually be both 5 to 10 years older and 5 to 10 years younger. And I'm not sure if you felt that you've learned from your friend, Justin, you said his name is?
Oh, absolutely.
So I think it really works. It works both ways. It really does.
I sure have. That's good. Well, so then I'm curious, you had a little tidbit in your book copy, classic books on achievement like those by Napoleon Hill, Brian Tracy, and Stephen Covey were written for a much different world. Today's young leaders need a fresh approach for achieving success in their lives and careers. And so I hear you in terms of we've got a different environment associated with, hey, more job switches, etc. I'm curious if you think anything, let's just pick on Stephen Covey, shall we? I'm curious if there's any particular messages from Stephen Covey, like maybe there's one of them 7 habits that is needs to be revamped or thought about differently in our environment today.
Well, to be honest, I don't remember all of the 7 habits from Stephen Covey and which one I would adapt or change. I will say that in Napoleon Hill, particularly, at that moment in time, there was clearly the beginning of this idea of a job for life, right? The idea of the college you get into and the first job that you have will determine your path. And certainly when I went to university, now well over 20 years ago, it really did feel that way. Everybody wanted that job in investment banking or consulting, which would give them a career path, which would then lead to the next good thing, which led to the next good thing. And getting to that one college got you the job in investment banking or consulting or law or medicine or whatever you were going to do. And the reality is today, that is just no longer the case. So I don't know, to answer your question, if Stephen Covey had anything that was directly as linear as what I saw in Napoleon Hill's books. But the job market of today, and I really say this for all the parents, obsessing over what college your kid gets into and obsessing over the first job that they have is just no longer as needed as maybe 20 years ago when that's where everyone's head was.
You know, it's funny, Asheesh, you mentioned your first job out of college having huge impact. I remember that was the exact thought process I went through when I thought, okay, what job do I want out of college? I want to have some skills and some network to do any number of things. So strategy consulting is what I want. And it worked out. I was at Bain for some time right out of college. And I thought that it has served me well. And so I guess back in the day, that was 2006 that I graduated college and did that. And it seems like that was swell for me. Are you thinking now it makes less of an impact if we get that start at a top consulting firm or bank or Google or wherever is hot, fresh out of college now? And can you share the underlying evidence for that?
Well, I will say that it's always important to surround yourself with people who push you. It's always important to surround yourself with opportunities that are sort of focused on giving you expansive knowledge, not just narrow and deep knowledge, particularly early in your career. So I think consulting jobs are great. I started my career in strategy consulting as well. So I know exactly what the motivation was for that job and exactly what some of the things, at least I got out of it. I will say today, the linear path of, okay, I'm going to go to a top consulting firm, then go get a top MBA, then go into either an industry or a related field, that path is fundamentally different today. Just to give you one data point, which I think drives this home, if you believe the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs data analysis, over 40% of our skills every 5 years will need to be relearned or reskilled, partly because of AI. And even if you believe that number is too high, because the way they got that data was through surveys. So it's possible that when you ask people, particularly during the hype of AI, they may over-exaggerate that number. So let's assume it's half that number. Let's assume that 1/5 of our skills, 20% of our skills, have to be relearned or reskilled in a different way every 5 years. That is a shockingly high number. That means that you're going to have to effectively reinvent yourself many times over the course of your career. So the job to really have is one which encourages you to always be curious and be willing to learn new things.
All right. Well, so then here and now, let's say we got listeners, they're in the middle of their careers, maybe the early side, maybe right in the middle. What are some of the top strategies and tactics that are implied by this new environment and your perspective on modern achievement?
So we've structured the book to have 30 lessons. And the lessons are organized into 3 sections: fixed, flexible, and freestyle. Some fixed lessons, like, for example, writing down your intentions and goals, have been around ever since the Stephen Covey and Napoleon Hill days. And we put that in the classic fixed section. So these are things that don't change based on time and place. Flexible are things that do change based on time and place. So for example, you're in your 30s, or whether you work in a different type of organization versus small versus large, one of those might be how to manage your burn rate. So one of the points I make in the book is to keep your burn rate low because it gives you lots of optionality. In a world of this much change, there may be times that you actually want to, for example, pursue an entrepreneurial path. And I'll tell you one story. I'm a tech entrepreneur by background before I joined Junior Achievement. And I remember interviewing a senior executive for a role, one of the tech companies that I ran. And he really wanted to work with us. But he built up a cost structure that required him to not be able to take a job for less than $350,000 base salary. Because he had kids in private school, he was paying for his country club memberships and other things that were really hard for him to let go of. And that dramatically limited his options for what he could do next. So it made it impossible for him to accept, or actually we didn't make him the offer because we said it's just unsustainable over the long run. So I tell you that story because I think a lot of mid-career professionals are just surrounding themselves with peers that increase their burn rate through peer pressure. And that limits your options in an age where you're going to have 20 jobs and 7 careers.
All right. And so just to be clear, we talk about burn rate. This is the rate at which we burn through our own personal cash to live our life in terms of the food we eat and the house we live in and our recurring expenses.
Yeah, I mean, it's entrepreneur speak for recurring expenses. I tell the story in the book as well of when I was in college, we did a magazine article asking recent graduates about their expenses and their salary and their bonus. It was, I think, one of the most popular articles we ever wrote.
Sounds good. People's money. Mm-hmm.
Because nobody knew anything about this. Everybody was aspiring for these jobs just because of, vague reputational goals. And they had no idea what it actually meant with regards to salary, bonus, and expenses. And the top graduates we interviewed had these amazing jobs at all the best banks and consulting firms, but they were not saving any money because they basically built up an expense side to keep up with the Joneses and were spending a lot on apartments and entertainment and travel. So it's important to think about that when it comes to burn rate. It's important to think about that in terms of the choices you make and the environments you surround yourself with.
Asheesh, it's funny. You're bringing me, we're talking about the back in the day. I'm thinking about my consulting time. I remember one time I was taking a bus to a party and my colleagues at Bain were kind of teasing me. They said, we make a lot of money, right? And I said, yes, thank you. I'm aware that, for a 23-year-old, this salary is great. But I also have some plans. associated with perhaps starting my own business in a couple of years. So I would like to have that flexibility, those options. And it's so funny how that happens. Little by little, things get locked in. And then you have fewer options. And it's funny when you said he couldn't take that job. I guess I think about maybe words rather literally is like, well, he could. But you have to say, hey, honey, we're pulling the kids out of private school and going to public school. We're selling this house and getting a much smaller, not as nice house. And so it might be impractical, but it's sort of like, well, how badly do you want it? And in practice, we're rarely able to turn on a dime. Like, let's change all the circumstances of our life quite quickly because of a cool opportunity. And the children and the family as a whole has gotten rather accustomed to how things have been. And they will probably not appreciate it being yanked away from them.
It feels like you're going backwards at times when in reality, you're just creating more options for yourself.
Well, that's a great tip right there. Very practical. Watch your burn rate. What are your recurring expenses? And hopefully you've got a nice healthy buffer with some savings and some growing savings. So you've got more options to do cool things as you're making career choices. Any other top strategies, tactics that are super handy for modern leaders?
Well, one thing which I think is also very popular in the book is this idea of going meta. Going meta means stepping back and looking at yourself as if somebody else were looking at you. And in education theory now, teachers tell students to actually reflect on what they've learned, to literally write down at the end of a lecture what they learned. And we didn't do that when we were in school. We didn't take a step back and actually have to reflect on what we learned. And applying that to your life, I think, is very powerful. And I've received lots of positive feedback on this one lesson, partly because I think it's so consistent with the zeitgeist. Things like mindfulness in many ways allow you to have a step back. And a lot of people don't do it. A lot of people do it at milestones like birthdays, anniversaries, and maybe when you write your annual resolutions. But regularly being reflective, it's actually very empowering to say, hey, I just went through this, this project was just done, or this initiative was just started and finished. And taking a step back for a second and saying, okay, what did I actually learn from this, and writing it down.
I love that. And so now I'm thinking about our episode with BJ Fogg with habits and sort of triggers or prompts. It sounds like in this context, the trigger or the prompt is whenever you finish a thing, let's reflect about that thing and be finished.
Well, I love Marshall's book, Triggers. That's a little bit of a different concept, but you're absolutely right. This idea of pausing, reflecting at the end of a project. What Marshall tends to put in his books, particularly the Triggers book, is the way you ask a question is so important. So he, for example, had me participate in a group which he calls LPR, Life Plan Review Group, where the way we asked ourselves questions had such an impact on our mindset. So for example, we asked ourselves questions every week over the course of a summer. Have I done my best to ...
Yeah.
And it changes the accountability from, geez, I'm trying to do this project. I want to be better at tennis. I want to be a better father. I want to be better at work. From, oh, did this go right? Did I win the game in tennis? Did I do well at work on the project? To, have I done my best to become good at tennis this week? Have I done my best to be a good father this week? So powerful to just change the framing. It makes it all about your own personal efforts, not what the results are.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, so I'm also curious, are there some things that you recommend we stop doing? Is there stuff that's outdated that we should just forget about and stop doing because it's no good anymore?
Well, I'd say you are certainly well aware of the debate right now about technology and social media. One thing I recommend in the book is to connect beyond the screen. We spend so much of our time on Zoom calls. In fact, there's all this great research now about how white collar workers end up spending more time in meetings than ever in history, partly because Zoom calls have made that so easy. And I recommend in one of the chapters and one of the lessons to connect with people beyond the screen and really be intentional about that. Another thing which I think is a big change is, I mentioned fixed and flexible. The third section of the book is freestyle. So the framework is fixed, flexible, freestyle. I mentioned this fixed or classic lessons, flexible change based on time and place. Freestyle are lessons, and your reaction to rules are created by you based on your own unique strengths. Okay. And at JA, we've introduced this framework to the organization where there are fixed things that are global, flexible things that vary based on time and place, such as in Europe versus Africa, and freestyle things, which are truly determined by the organizations and staff on the ground in every geography that we operate in, because we were in 118 countries. And I do think there's something very empowering and powerful about creating your own rules and having much more agency in some of the choices that you make. And when we asked the young people to tell us about some of these rules, some young people talked about the importance of embracing your inexperience and cluelessness, or the importance of really experiencing a different path relative to what your friends are doing. So we got some really good insights from young people who shared their own story with us.
And I think that's a pretty handy framework in general as you think about your policies, your rules. Is this fixed? Is it flexible? Is it freestyle? Is this always everywhere for everyone? Is it under these sorts of circumstances, or is it totally individualized? That's useful in and of itself in terms of, as you think about a rule, a guideline, a policy, how ironclad and locked in is it? Is it just a useful way to think about stuff? To follow up on your point with regard to social media and meetings and Zoom, is your suggestion that we do less of it, and how?
So the how gets complicated because it depends on which organization you're part of and what role you have. If you're a leader and you've got some degree of control over these, or if you're not yet a leader and you really have to participate because of where you are in your career. One recommendation I would have is to create protected time for yourself. And no matter what role you have, whether you have a leadership role or whether you don't have full control over your calendar, I think you have the ability to protect time. And you can use that time for in-person meetings. You can use that time to actually get writing done if you've got the kind of role that involves writing or producing. But a lot of, I think, particularly young leaders are scared to block off time on their calendar for things that matter to them. And I do think in the world of 20 jobs and 7 careers, where you've got to really invest in your own personal development, that's important.
Now, you say scared to block off time. What are some of the underlying concerns there?
Well, I think there's this general feeling when you're early in your career that you want to be in the meeting, that being in the meeting allows you to get knowledge, allows you to build relationships, keeps you connected. And they're definitely, I would say, particularly for aspiring leader personalities, a desire to be in the action. But that comes with some trade-offs. And you have to realize that it's sometimes okay to not be in every meeting, and it's okay to really own the project that you own and make sure it goes well, and spend that other time you'd otherwise be in these meetings where you get to hear and learn, really investing in your personal development and investing in other things that are important to you.
And when we do that investing in personal development, what do you find to be some of the most high yield possible activities that we can do?
Well, I mean, there's such a wide range. Right now, I would say there's both skill set things where you learn new skills, everything from obviously all the AI things that are coming out, through to mindset-oriented activities. And the mindset-oriented activities, I think, are very powerful. I'll give you one example. So I asked somebody on one of our boards if I could job shadow him for a day. And everyone can do this because almost everybody says yes if asked. It's such a compliment to be asked to have somebody basically follow you around for a day and learn from you. Okay?
I imagine they say, if you want, it's going to be super boring, dude.
Well, because we're all on Zoom calls, that's why it feels super boring. But I will say, certainly, and I did this before the pandemic, so yes, the world has changed on this dimension. But in fact, this particular person still goes in the office every day, so I guess it hasn't changed for him. And I learned so much from spending the day with him. I learned how he interacts with people. I learned new frameworks. He's a CEO of a large organization, so I learned how he communicates, and I really got to see the nuance of how he manages different types of people. I still talk about it because it's happened, 7 years ago now, but it's so powerful that I did that. We actually have programs at JA where we do job shadows, where young people are allowed to shadow executives for a day and encouraged to do it as a career development exercise. And we even have this amazing program called Leaders for a Day, where some of the top students get to actually follow like world leaders for a day. And we get them in front of either politicians or CEOs or people who are very, very prominent who agree to do it. And it's transformational because it opens up your mind to things you just didn't know existed that you could achieve. For a person who's looking for a way to invest in their personal development beyond just, reading great books and listening to great podcasts, I do think doing something experiential like a job shadow is transformational.
Yeah. And it's so intriguing, this job shadow. Is one version is a job that you think you might want to do, or someone who's more senior than you to get a sense for What's that look like? Or what do those skills look like? I'm also thinking it might be interesting even to pick a job of something that it would just be good for you to learn, even though it might not be super senior. For example, I'm thinking if you feel uncomfortable with conflict, it might be interesting to shadow a police officer as he's doing a day of evictions or a collections agency, like something like what would be one of the most contentious, unpleasant, conflict-driven things, jobs. Let's go shadow that, and that may well be a harrowing experience that could also give you some real growth.
I love that idea. I mean, we think of job shadow very much about mindset shift, exposing people to things they didn't know existed, but you could absolutely apply it to skill sets as well. Conflict resolution skill sets. We've got amazing lawyers, for example, who all day spend their time negotiating. And negotiation skills are sorely lacking for a lot of young people who haven't had to do it. So I love your idea of applying job shadows to skill sets. I might steal that wonderful idea.
Okay, well, steal away. Tell me if it's any good. This is just theoretical off the top of my head. That's great. And so what you say, when you ask, most people say yes. I would say, first, I guess I'm also a little surprised by that. I think some people might say that feels kind of intrusive, or I kind of need my quiet, alone introvert time, please. How do you recommend framing this request?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you ask for a full day of somebody's time, they may immediately go to the one or two meetings which are personal in nature or confidential in nature, and they may decline based on knowing those are in their calendar. So you need to phrase it based on, and of course, if there's any part of the day you don't want me to shadow you, I'm happy to step away and do my own work. So really, it's picking the two or three meetings that they feel very comfortable including you in. But I think the power of it, honestly, is people feeling like you're learning from them. And of course, this is what happens. Actually, this is something I should definitely share. When we do these job shadows, we do it at scale. We do it in over 80 countries around the world. Of course, the young people who shadow the executives get so much out of it. But the executives almost universally say they learned two things. One, they learn from looking at their own job through somebody else's eyes. So they love that. And the second is they actually learn almost like in a reverse mentoring way from the perspective of somebody who's just has a different set of life experiences. So when you're asking the person who you want to shadow, I would encourage you to use the language which just makes them feel it truly is mutual, not just completely one way.
Well, and I guess I'm thinking some of the most powerful job shadowing action, as I imagine the day, would be right after the meeting in terms of like, hey, I noticed you said this in that moment.
Oh, I love that.
What were you thinking about there? And they say, oh, yeah, well, I noticed that person seemed really concerned. So I wanted to proactively make sure that we addressed their concerns by blah, 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 yeah, whatever. So that's my intuition about how that would be most amazing.
No, is your intuition spot on? In fact, we actually have this exercise called I Noticed. We do it occasionally at work. We do it really often in a learning group I'm part of through the Young Presidents Organization's YPO. And in our YPO forum, we do an I Noticed round after somebody has presented. And we all go around and literally just talk about what we noticed. It's very powerful. I've used it at work now and then. You can't use it after every meeting. That takes up too long. But for certain types of meetings, people who are the presenters love getting the kind of input. And it doesn't have to be, geez, I noticed you messed up this slide. It's usually actually, I noticed a connection to something you said 3 weeks ago, or I noticed something I'm working on that ties into something that you're working on. And it's very powerful to make time for the I noticed for the right setting.
That's great. Well, Asheesh, tell me, anything else you want to make sure to mention before we hear about some of your favorite things?
Well, there's another lesson which I'm very proud of, which is learn to balance simplicity and complexity. I think for aspiring leaders, it's a nuance, but it's so important, which is if you become really great at taking complex things and making them simple, it is such a powerful skill. And I know this from at least my job because I ran two technology companies. And to be able to take things that are otherwise actually pretty hard to do and not brag about the fact that they were hard to do, but talk about how simple they are in terms of the benefit they create for whoever the user is, that's where the power comes. So we made it a life lesson and put it in this book as well.
Yeah, that's super. And I think often people don't care, it sounds harsh, but they don't, about sort of the underlying complexity and all that you had to go through. unless it's really a caring mentor type figure who's invested in your career and your development and your process. But for the most part, I'm thinking about customers or senior executives just sort of want to know, so what's the benefit and how is this new and different and better now? Okay, understood. Thank you.
Well, we're so busy showing the world how smart we are, we sometimes forget that that's really not what it's about. It's about genuinely creating value for other people. And so how do we become better, particularly certainly when you're communicating with boards and customers and stakeholders, where they, as you said, they don't really care about the how, they just care about the true benefit. How do we put our ego aside a little bit and leave it for somebody else to learn, frankly, all the hard work that was behind what you created? And that's really hard for a lot of people.
Big thanks to Asheesh for sharing his wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Jenni Kayne, who will help you step into summer with style and ease. Jenni Kayne is a California clothing brand with delightful staples that make getting dressed effortless and delightful. They offer minimalist and refined pieces such as luxurious cashmere sweaters. My own Jenni Kayne cashmere hoodie is already a contender for my number one favorite clothing item of all time. It is the perfect answer to every time the office AC gets cranked a little too high. It's warm and cozy and yet somehow still looks super sharp, beautiful, and professional. Jenni Kayne has everything you need to embrace your uniform. And for a limited time, Jenni Kayne is offering our listeners 15% off of your first order. Go to jennikayne.com and use the code AWESOME15 to get that 15% off. That's spelled Jenni, Jenni, Kayne, KAYNE.com/awesome15 to get that 15% off. All right. Well, now could you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
So one of my favorite quotes I've reframed in the book is success is moving from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. So we put in the book, life is moving from mess to mess with no loss of confidence.
I like it. And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
It's a little bit different, but it ties to one of the lessons in the book. So I want to at least connect the dots. So now you asked me about one of my favorite studies, you said? So the Minnesota twin study is one of the classic studies. I've got identical twins, so I've got a particular interest in nature versus nurture. And I think we, particularly in America, feel so strongly that so much of what's possible comes down to our own efforts. It's kind of humbling to actually read the twin study and see so much of what happens is actually nature, not nurture, which I think you can interpret as disempowering, but I don't view it that way at all. I view it as something which is the reality of what science tells us, and we've got to work with what science tells us.
Okay. And a favorite book?
It's called The Magic of Thinking Big, and David Schwartz. And one of the nice things about this book is it tells you that the amount of effort it takes to add a 0 or 2 on any goal is so little compared to the amount of effort you're going to do without the zeros. So you may as well have the zeros because you can just make a bigger impact.
All right. And is there a key nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate? You hear folks quote back to you often?
Well, the sad truth of it is I've now used the word double click so often. People tease me about it, about double clicking on.
There was just an article about that in, was it New York Times or Wall Street Journal?
I know. It's awful. Let's be appropriately self-deprecating here and take the blame. I've fallen into the abyss of using double click and I can't get out of the habit.
Well, while we're here, when you say double click, do you specifically mean to go deeper upon and expand on a topic or matter?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I actually kind of like that in terms of, I'm imagining the window is expanding. In some ways, in my visual brain responds nicely to that. It's like, okay, I'm actually imagining a program expanding with the whole animation. So I'm there.
We both started our career in consulting. So I think we've fallen into the trap of agreeing with each other about phrases. But for the rest of the world, apparently double click, for whatever reason, brings up negative metaphors.
As long as the synergies are highly impactful, Asheesh, I think it's okay.
As long as we have a good 2x2 matrix to show how to be in the top quadrant, we're good.
No, yeah. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
So jaworldwide.org is our organizational website, and modernachievement.com is the book's website.
Okay. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Well, I will say one of the ways that you can make a huge impact in the world and feel really positive is to find a young person and say something positive to them to encourage them to pursue either a career or a dream that they want to. It's so powerful for young people to hear from people in their mid-career or late career that they can be successful. So you've got that power and use it.
All right. Asheesh, thank you. I wish you much modern achievement.
Thank you. This was awesome.
I really love what Asheesh had to say about that job shadowing approach because one, I think it will surface all kinds of cool wisdom that you don't know deep inside folks' brain, how they're thinking and processing and deciding stuff. And two, I think we're inclined to underestimate the kindness and generosity of folks to actually comply with our request if we were to ask them. Got another episode coming up about hope and how we tend to underestimate the kindness of folks from Dr. Jamil Zaki coming up. And I think this is a classic example. Like, oh no, nobody would want to give up a whole day or half day for this. I think you'd be surprised. Great stuff from Asheesh. If you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced, please drop on by awesomeatyourjob.com/EP986. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.